Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Paz from the Two Man Power Trip. Of course, joining me is the wizard himself, my co-host, Mr. Trump Mania, Lavi Margolin. Lavi, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. A very special day. One of our most prolific guests, and really the godfather of modern pro wrestling business, joining us once again. It's sort of always hard for us to resist, like when do you call the power of WrestleNomics and when do you stand on your own? But this is an awesome time to welcome back Brandon Thurston.
I'm glad to be here. I'm always glad to talk with John and Lavi. Why is this an awesome time to be here?
Well, we're going to get into it in a little bit, but I was grabbing some news for the podcast today, and then I saw on Bloomberg some more news about Paul Weiss' firm being represented by WWE. I'm like, okay, where are they getting this from? And they're citing WrestleNomics. We're like, okay, this is perfect.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that and whatever else you want.
And interesting news, a good buddy of mine is retiring soon. So that might be good news for everyone else except for WWE, but the legend himself, Jerry McDevitt, is retiring this year.
Is that your friend? Is Jerry your friend?
Well, I know him a little bit. Yeah. But I know him a little bit. And I've interviewed him for, which was awesome. He was an awesome interview. I just couldn't believe it. Anything you asked, he answered. I was shocked. So he was awesome. But I feel like that could be good news for MLW.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have a sense of like, is it going to be better for them or not? I mean, it's a different law firm. I mean, I'm sure WWE's not happy to continue fighting this lawsuit and that it wasn't dismissed. But I'm not sure why it is a whole different law firm, because there were 3 or 4 lawyers from K&L Gates, which is the law firm that Jerry McDevitt works for, and they're switching over to a whole different law firm, Paul Weiss. There's many other partners in the whole name, but that is a law firm that WWE is already working with related to the UFC merger. So there was probably some relationship there that led to this.
I was just kind of joking, but his track record, obviously, I mean, he's obviously won probably 90 out of 100 or whatever you want to say. His win rate for them over the years has been great, and obviously he saved a couple of people's asses over there, names excluded. So it's just interesting news that he'll be retiring, and good luck with him. Could get off right off into the sunset, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first time I ever got an email back from him. I think. We were doing our interview yesterday with Chris Hero for Pollock and Thurston, and it was like while we were doing that, and we went off the air. I said, "Oh, I have an email from Jerry McDevitt," which is always what one wants.
yes, exactly. But WrestleNomics, though, I mean, that's awesome in itself. But it just seems to be growing and growing. You're doing more stuff. Is that the goal? Just keep growing and growing it. More articles, more analysis, more Brandon Thurston.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have vague intentions, I guess. I mean, I'm definitely, for ego reasons, I want it to grow and gain as much power and influence as possible. But on the other hand, I mean, hopefully my higher brain, I just want to get information out there to people in a way that is effective. There's a little bit of both going on there, probably. It's doing well lately. I think Showbiz Daily, unfortunately, no longer reporting TV ratings is part of why I'm in the last couple of weeks doing especially better. But we're moving the podcast, the Sunday podcast, WrestleNomics Radio, over to the Patreon. Patreon is the business, basically. And maybe that's contributing to it too. But we're going to continue to be very fortunate that we're gaining subscribers. Yeah.
When you look at it, you guys are like the source for a lot of this stuff. And even guys that I know that are, current wrestlers, were wrestlers, I mean, they're studying stuff in the business, whether they know it or not. They're usually like, oh, I'm looking at WrestleNomics, because they want to know the ratings and stuff. Have you noticed that you've becoming like kind of the source for a lot of the important business things and ratings and a lot of important discussion in wrestling right now?
I don't listen to a lot of other podcasts. Does it come up that much? I do talk to my friends sometimes that like I haven't seen in a while.
Sure.
And like I went to an ESW indie show a few months back, and I saw a bunch of people that I hadn't seen in a while, like who I came up in wrestling with, who are still big wrestling fans, and they're telling me about these podcasts that they listen to, and like, oh yeah, you're mentioned all the time on this stuff. I mean, I guess I'm aware of like the news aggregators, aggregating the ratings all the time and attributing WrestleNomics. Yeah.
But even guys like Eric Bischoff, I mean, he's talking about like he's looking for numbers. He'll go, "Oh yeah, Wrestlenomics," and they'll kind of just randomly you'll be brought up. So it's like, wow, I don't even know if people realize it, but you're like the number one go-to source when people want ratings and information and people's thirst for business knowledge.
Yeah, it's I mean, I have access to some ratings, so that's extremely helpful. And part of it too is just doing the work of journalism, I guess, in that like I've been able to get some records requests back from municipalities. For example, San Antonio, where they ran the Royal Rumble at, um, and just sending emails sometimes, send an email to K&L Gates lawyers and maybe they'll respond. They probably won't, but sometimes they do, and things like that. Yeah.
Now, switching topics, let's talk about the actual business end of things. Talk about AEW, talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling. Forbidden Door seemed like a huge success. People were saying, oh, did they build it up properly? Well, every number, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it looked like they built more than they did the year before. So they were growing in some aspects, to me anyway. So who benefits more, New Japan or AEW from Forbidden Door 2?
Probably AEW. I think we asked Tony, somebody asked Tony, maybe I did, whether New Japan was getting any kind of compensation for this.
Yeah, is there a
And
split revenue?
I think he said a licensing fee. Now this is after around the time of the first one. Um, so I don't know exactly what the business agreement is. But it certainly did better than the previous one. And it's a AEW hosted show, I would say. The AEW put on that show. I don't think yes, it was co-branded and both the talent were there, but I don't think I wouldn't have any illusions about that was an AEW show, very much in cooperation with New Japan though. Well, it's mostly good, more so good for AEW, but it's also good for New Japan too, because New Japan is, they've got a long way to go to build their brand back up in the United States to where it was, say, in 2018 before AEW came along. According to Tony, it's doing better pay-per-view buys than the previous year's Forbidden Door, which I believe it's conspicuous that all these pay-per-views suddenly have the same number, 140,000 buys.
Right.
So take that for what it's worth. But he said it's doing better than Double or Nothing this year as well, which I don't know. I think Dave might have reported that's
135, I think it was,
okay.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So they've definitely been in a lull in a lot of ways since CM Punk press conference happened. But Forbidden Door was a big hit. I mean, their live events are not doing super great. WWE's live events are, but that's sort of where they are. Their TV ratings. Do you want to get into the TV ratings? Collision's out there, and Collision just did a pretty low rating. I have been admonished.
Yeah.
I've been admonished about the TV ratings and the TV ratings analysis, and we'll see what happens. We don't have any ranking information currently because Showbiz Daily is not around, but we should be getting some ranking information soon from one source or another.
Yeah, 452 down from what was it, 816 the first week. So I mean, that's losing almost half the audience there. It's pretty bad.
The first episode they're probably never going to do again what that first episode did. Second episode, what was it? I'll look it up. But the second episode was down about 595, and I was expecting the third episode to maybe be down a little bit, a few single digits of percent, but this went down quite a bit to the point where like Rampage did a decent number for what Rampage has been doing lately on Friday. This was almost identical to what Rampage did, to the point where like when I reported it, I felt I had to mention Rampage because I was afraid that people were going to think that I just accidentally reported the Rampage number as the Collision number. But it doesn't look good. There's ways to spin it as like, well, look at the ranking. We don't know what the ranking is yet, and I don't know that AEW knows what the ranking is yet. So we'll see if we get that information. But more importantly, we'll see another rating for whatever they do this Saturday on Tuesday morning. That's going to be my Tuesday morning routine, I guess, from now on. And I don't know. I think it's got to be better than what it is. At least better than what the movies were delivering on Saturday nights on TNT previously, if it's going to have some real value to WBD when they negotiate a new TV deal, which apparently they haven't yet.
And I Yeah, and I like Collision too. I know I like the production value of it. I think the way the show was structured was really good. I like the Joe Punk stuff, but I don't know, maybe me and Lavi are just old ROH marks that we just love the Joe Punk feud 20 years later. But I mean, I was enjoying that stuff. So hopefully it goes up this week because Punk's actually wrestling Joe this week. So hopefully, I mean, it's got to go up, right? I mean, it can't go down any further.
I suppose it was a factor of last week is that Punk didn't have a match, and he did have a match the previous 2 weeks. So, by God, it better be up.
Yeah. Oh my God. With like all, well, not excuse me, not All Japan, with All Elite
We
Wrestling
can
and
talk about All Japan
WWE.
in the 90s if you want.
Oh yeah, hell yeah. Tiger Driver 91. They're Omega and Osprey are taking the Misawa Kawada spot there, which is risky and dangerous as hell. But that's beside the point. Do you think tribalism is much more so worse nowadays with AEW versus WWE, or do you think it was worse with WCW and WWF?
I think people's behavior is overwhelmingly influenced by the media and technology that they use to interact with each other. And maybe if there was social media in the late 90s, maybe WWF and WCW fans would have gotten to this point. Um, I mean, the circumstances are different in some ways, right? There's this entrenched 20 years of WWE fandom that's had no competitor of this size anyway.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and I think I was just thinking this morning, um, you know how hysterical people can get about WrestleMania 3 and the attendance. What's the real attendance? We might differ within this conversation about what the attendance is or whatever attendance means. Um, and I was thinking, you know what? We didn't have an AEW angle to that issue, and I think we might be about to get an AEW angle to that issue because if All In Wembley, it looks like it's. I was talking with someone this morning. It looks like it's on a trajectory to possibly reach the drop count of WrestleMania 32. That'll be an issue unto itself, which is 80,709, I believe, according to the Arlington Police Department. So Wembley could conceivably hit that number. And then the question becomes, well, what really was the attendance in WrestleMania 3? Because I think that's the only one of in modern times in which people were not ordered by the government to go. So that's ruling out the North Korea shows in 1995.
Right, yeah.
And I know there's, way back historically, there's supposedly like events where, in India and I believe Greece, some Jim Londo's matches that are supposedly
Yes.
attended
Yep.
by 100,000. Hard to say if that's legend, and if that's myth or that's reality. But yeah, I think in terms of modern times, it could get really close to the WrestleMania 32 number. And I think the WrestleMania 3 number is like somewhere in the 80s, mid 80s. I don't know if it'll get that high. So we'll have to relitigate that soon, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'm gonna get fired up on that one. If you look at it though, WrestleMania 3, there's so many, right? All the seats are full. It's a full house. I think what is the stadium hold? And then you got to realize how many people are on the floor. So it's got to be upper 80s, no?
What's the football capacity of the Pontiac
82?
Silverdome?
82, I think.
Okay,
I think 82, something like that.
right. So I've discussed this a little bit, like in messages with Dave Meltzer, and be like, but I said what you said. The capacity is 80,000 some odd, and he's like, no, he thinks even that was an exaggeration. The football capacity is an exaggeration.
Oh, wow.
So obviously you have whatever's in the stands. Assume that's full. This is not a WrestleMania era where there's a big set. I mean, it's. I don't think they're not doing like thousands of production kills here. Certainly, almost none. It looks like.
Nope.
So you have 80,000 in the stands, and then you're putting people on the floor. You would think, okay, it's got to be somewhere well over 80,000. They of course announced 93,179. Am I getting that right? Yep. So, and maybe there's suites. I don't know. You've got me on a day where I was actually looking through this and like looking at the seating map and looking at the that really high res like fisheye photo that somebody took, and I was like drawing lines on the gates and trying to getting ready to try to do an estimate. I'm not far along on it at all, but trying to like, okay, I found some pictures of like when the stadium is being torn down, assuming that the upper deck hasn't been changed since 87, and sort of counting the seats across and then counting the rows down and being like, okay, I can calculate area out of that, and maybe I can do at least a few samples of that and get the square pixels per seat, and then extrapolate onto that the attendance for each section, and then to at least get an idea whether football capacity at least was truly truly what it was officially stated as 80,000 or whatever, a little bit more than 80,000.
Yep.
That's what I've been doing today. A little
interesting.
bit.
So if Dave is right, maybe if it isn't really 80,000, maybe I do have to rethink it. But if it is 82,000, then I do think the number is closer to 90. But I mean, who the hell knows? I mean, this is what, 35 years ago? It's going to be hard to figure out.
Yeah. And
when you,
I don't think there's any public records request at this point that could be done to extract records that may prove it from 1987. Maybe somewhere in Stanford there are, but those are private records.
When you look at All In, right? I mean, it's going to do this unbelievable number, higher than I even thought. I thought 65,000, but I mean, it just keeps going up and up and up. Is it crazy that the business of AEW seems to be down, but somehow they're selling that many tickets? You know what I mean? Somehow the popularity of the live big show is still there.
Yeah, I mean, they've never been to the UK before. That's what's selling this show. They've existed for 4 years or so now, but they've never been outside the United States or Canada. And UK fans are pretty passionate. They're on a good network too. They're on ITV in the UK. And I believe, according to Tony, and I think we have numbers to back this up, that ITV, Dynamite is the most watched wrestling show, I think, in the UK, more than the WWE shows. And I suppose it doesn't hurt that, it's kind of easy to travel to if you're within Europe in the first place. But that's what's selling it. The pay-per-views have been doing okay. The Toronto show did very well. Forbidden Door did very well.
Killed it, yep.
The Collision the night before, not so much, right? It's about half full. But even, the Las Vegas show at T-Mobile, I was there, and it's a big building, but it's an arena. It was not completely full. It was a respectable crowd, but it was not completely full. So even their pay-per-views domestically are starting to wane a little bit from what they once were in terms of ticket demand.
Lavi, I know you're chomping at the bit. You got some good questions for Brandon.
Yeah, so while you guys were talking, I was doing my crack research, and I think the secret to how many people does the Pontiac Silverdome hold lies, like many secrets, in the Vatican. The capacity for the stadium may have been, when the Pope came in 1987, Wikipedia lists 93,682. So if you're using the full floor, it would have to be around, if it's a legitimate number.
I think Dave's response is that even that number is a work. I don't know. It's late August. I'm sure we will get into it. And
I wonder if there was like an official letter sent to the Vatican requesting the attendance figure. Keith Elliott, I think it's Keith Elliott Greenberg, is writing a book on WrestleMania 3. So my first comment on Facebook was like, good luck with the attendance. I think he knows what he's getting himself involved in. So with the MLW WWE case again, actually from your research, you had a timetable that you shared. Now that it's preparing for trial, it bumps it more than 2 years into the future, nearly, for the hearing on anticipated dispositive motion. So it would be likely more than 2 years before this goes even to trial. So in a case like this, where you have a gigantic corporation and you have seemingly a smaller company with investors, we don't know, and there was some speculation, the firm representing MLW, is it on contingency? Is it, by the hour, so to speak?
Like, it's a very high-profile Kasowitz firm, yeah.
Yeah. So does that, as it keeps getting bumped, does that put more pressure on MLW seemingly to look for a settlement, or WWE now seeing that they'll have to go to trial? Does it put more pressure on them, or do you think it's even to how it's been?
I mean, I don't know. I think any more than you do. Corp Power's public message has been, we're ready to go to trial. We believe in our case, and let's go to discovery and trial. My guess is that there's some sort of contingency that the Caswitz firm is serving, giving them legal services on contingency of whatever the results, whether it's a settlement or a verdict, is of this litigation. Yeah, I don't really know. I think, the question is, will WWE let this go all the way, or will they try to settle it? And I just don't know. And then I don't know if the merger plays into that. These seem like things that could be factors, but I just don't know to what extent.
So last week I caught John by surprise. I almost knocked him off his chair. My outside speculation was that it's in both parties' best interest, except for the idea of the monopoly being floated, that WWE just makes an offer to MLW, buys the assets, and closes the case. It seems like the best
Buys MLW.
Buys MLW outright, right?
Mhm.
The case ends. MLW seemingly wasn't thriving, even if they had been on Vice, even if they had, gotten on its distribution, especially pre-pandemic, especially since AEW started. So they get to close up shop, the investors get their money, and WWE ends a headache and gets a little bit of a library.
I guess. Do you think they would use the library? I mean, for all practical purposes. I mean, they just let their agreements with Progress go, right? Progress and ICW, they let those deals expire, so that stuff I believe is no longer on the network. I don't think it adds a lot of value for WWE's video rights. But the greater problem is having this lawsuit out there, and whether there's problems just in discovery alone. We might end up getting TV contracts partly or completely disclosed here. So maybe. I mean, what does Court do though? Does he want to not work in wrestling anymore, or what would he do then? Does he not want to continue to run MLW?
Sure, he did go away from wrestling for a long time, right, in the UFC world and TV production world. The podcasting isn't what it once was, but you make enough money, you have a lot of options, and it just does. It seems like their path to growth was pretty much blocked when AEW came. Like I felt like not that MLW would have been what AEW is to any degree, but like it was like slow growth. They had a lot of momentum, and then that just like fell off, especially because of the pandemic, but not only because of it.
Yeah, I saw PW Insider got a comment from Reels saying that they were still considering a second season with MLW. Did you see that?
Yeah, I was wondering if that was just like protecting themselves with all this like lawsuit talk. Like if we don't close the door, then it's like not not a factual talking point, right? And they have a partnership with WWE. So I think they're protecting themselves. I don't think anything will come of it. But it did remind me, actually, I did want to ask you, like, I think it was a final first run rating of 60,000, checking the Patreon. What do you think about that rating? For me, I thought it was pretty solid because if you take out that cop show, John always has to remind me what it's called, that's like a mega rating. But nothing else, as far as I can tell, did any sort of rating on Reels, and I think they held up, pretty solidly.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare it to New Japan, it did about what New Japan does on a similarly powered network on a similar time slot. So I think it did okay, but it wasn't like it. It did the baseline for like if you were looking at it ahead of time, you'd say, okay, 10 o'clock on Reels, kind of similar to Access. You would think, well, over under, does it do better or worse than New Japan? And it did about what New Japan does. Whereas New Japan is not, it's not necessarily new content, but MLW Underground wasn't live either. But I think it's not like it way overperformed and you said, wow, we have to keep this and do something more with it.
So before going to the specific wrestling news, I was really curious, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, your weekly show is now going under the Patreon umbrella, but you're continuing with John Pollock, of course, at Post Wrestling in terms of a weekly show, sort of like I'm sure it's a lot of experimentation and figuring out what works best, but like sort of what went into your thinking with that? I want to learn.
So I've done some audio behind the paywall. Had done. Do you remember live TV ratings talk where I would go live like right after the Dynamite rating came out? That led to a lot of reasonable people being in the chat, and that was fine. I felt like that was probably putting too much emphasis on week to week ratings, So I kind of discontinued. I did discontinue doing that, and then I was doing the Thursday 30 with Gullah for a while, which is a 30-minute podcast, and I felt like we were running out of things to talk about, so I stopped doing that, or I stopped doing that at about the same time that we started to do the Pollock and Thurston podcast. So that was taking some time too, and I feel like what John and I do is, I think we have a good program going that we kind of just started. I just passed like the 10-week mark in a row. So I figure I don't need 2 free podcasts in that one. I want something good to be behind the paywall for subscribers. And the Sunday show is a proven show. So I think that's where it's best. And I think what I would like to do, and I think we are kind of doing with the Pollock and Thurston podcast, is really sort of delve into the ways in which wrestling is related to the broader media world. Like that's really what I have in mind when we have like people like Pat Crakes on and Richard Deitch and things like that. And to give people, to bring guests on to give them the maximum exposure possible if they want to promote something, and then to take the heavy hardcore wrestling talk, which I think is what the Sunday show is. People who are further down the funnel, if you will, and put that behind the paywall, where I think that's the audience that it is best suited for.
No, that's really interesting because around the same time, I don't know if you know the Mat Men podcast. They had been independent for a long time, and then they connected with Wrestling Observer. I think one of them still does like the syndicated Sunday night program, but they had decided to leave that to say like we don't want to be behind a paywall. We want our show to be free, but it also factors in that it wasn't their paywall, right? It was the Wrestling Observer. So whatever arrangements that they had. So it's always interesting to see like media, the best way to position that. But moving along.
Yeah, I mean, like I have a bit more to add to that, I guess. Like I'm really worried about. I mean, all revenue sources are a problem. they lead to obviously everybody wants money and to make money, but they lead to incentives that are often not healthy for your product or your audience. And I think all of the revenue source, all the different kinds of revenue sources are probably contributing to that in some way. But I think advertising revenue, especially because, I mean, if everybody was on a subscription model, we wouldn't see as much clickbait to the degree that we do. I'm well aware that there's subscription services that will sort of advertise themselves in a way that draws attention and tries to pique people's curiosity, so they can still happen. But I think advertising, having to get all the eyeballs and the widest audience all the time, is especially unhealthy for a media organization. If Wrestlenomics is a media organization.
So actually, that reminds me. For the first time, I saw on your Facebook where you actually asked people, please stop taking the graphics that I worked very hard to make and using them, especially if you're not citing them. It was this, I mean, I would say the same thing, but I had never seen you do it before. Has it become just like so abundant that you can't go anywhere without seeing it? And it's kind of frustrating trying to like rein people back in.
It's mostly like Reddit and these accounts that I would call engagement accounts on Twitter. Those are the two culprits, where they would share the chart. And my response is, don't share the chart because I made the chart. The data is the data, and it's just information. And I think it's completely within fair use to use the data and say, this is what he reported, this for this quarter hour, that for that quarter hour. It's just information. And it's Nielsen's data. It's not my data. So I don't have any right to say, don't re-report that. But if I make an image, it's the easiest thing to do, just copy the image and then share it. You know, that I think is our own creation and shouldn't be shared.
So, in terms of talking about little WWE, AEW, like you mentioned, and I see this not only with your reports, of course, WrestleTix throughout Twitter feed. WWE seems to be, when they're returning somewhere, for the most part, we see them overperform. AEW, I kind of question, like, should they even be in major arenas right now without a major show? Maybe like those like old type of WCW Nitro buildings, and I could be wrong on the attendance, but like a Mark of the Quad Cities, right? Like 4,000 to 7,000 really excited people may be better than 4,000 people in a 19,000 seat building. But do you think this is an indicator of like where the business is going? People often say like the first thing that you'll see is like house shows. So WWE is hot, AEW is cold. Like, is that where the business is going, or is that just one metric?
I think AEW's business has cooled off, and they're also diluting their product in a way that it has not been diluted before. Obviously, WWE has similar, actually more hours of weekly content, but their interest in their content has improved. Interest in AEW's content has disimproved, and maybe the return of CM Punk mitigates some of that, but it doesn't completely. Those shows in Canada that all had him on it are not sold out, to say the least. And if that continues to be the trend, I mean, I think I agree with Lavi, who suddenly disappeared, that it's probably more cost effective to look at booking venues that are like the size of a college basketball arena versus an NBA arena.
My students taught me when the Zoom lags to like shut off the camera. So
Okay.
trying all the techniques.
Okay, good.
So as we talked about, with the ratings, there's certainly issues there for AEW. But do you think one of the issues overall for them is in terms of their distribution? Just W, for the most part, you'll go to cable to get it, but WWE has broadcast. Blessed us with the ratings, has syndication. Who I became aware of originally, Gavin Bridge from Variety, talks about fast all of the time. And when I was inquiring about it, he was clear to say that he doesn't think that should be AEW's primary thing. But there's all these different ways of meeting your audience where they are. And do you think there's an issue of being so loyal to like a Turner network that they're not even doing streaming deals? Or do you think they have to like distribute more?
I don't think distribution, at least domestically, is a big deal for them. I think there's a couple things happening there, but I think certainly in this term, let's say this term of rights for WWE, which is 2019 to 2023. During that time, I think streaming mattered more. Broadcast, they've been on Fox only in this term, not prior. That certainly hasn't hurt. And it's made SmackDown the most highly viewed show by a decisive margin over Raw. So allowing fans to have more access to you via Fox can't hurt, but it doesn't feel like a big deal. It doesn't feel like a transformative deal. Being on Peacock, I think, has helped them, and I think it coincided in early 2021 with a leveling off of popularity that up until that point, during the pandemic and for years before, had coincided with the decline in fan interest. When they got onto Peacock, and maybe there were other things that were a factor as well, maybe the creative was a part of it, but their popularity that was declining suddenly leveled off. So I think increasing the exposure that those pay-per-views have, which also is what happened with the W Network, which I think also coincided with an increase in fan interest, increasing the access to that premium live content had a great benefit for WWE. In the case of AEW, I think it would be to their benefit to have their pay-per-views or to have some sort of content that people really cared about on streaming. And it's probably best suited for the pay-per-views, but they're only doing 4 pay-per-views a year, so I don't know how much there is of that for that to make a big difference. I do have a lot of questions around, like, why are they so loyal to WBD? Which, like, as soon as I say that, I can hear someone slapping me in the face. But, like, it's their biggest TV partner. It's they're paying them the probably overwhelming majority of their annual revenue is coming from WBD. But ultimately, if you want to improve your TV rights fees, it's just like if you're selling a house or a car, you got to have multiple bidders for your content. And I, for one thing, I don't know legally how that's going to work out in terms of, like, is there an exclusive bidding window? Would AEW even be willing to go beyond that window? Can they? How do you gauge interest before that window opens to whether or not it's a good idea to go out on the open market or not? And all the vibes I get whenever you ask Tony Khan a question surrounding the issue of the TV network, it's just an outpour of love and appreciation for Mr. Zaslav. So is AEW capable of getting bidders and thus, driving up the price of their content? I don't know, and I'm skeptical. And maybe that's just, you just shouldn't expect that because it's a nascent brand and it's on its first real TV deal of any, real value. And maybe they're just not a strong enough and recognizable enough brand yet to have the power to explore that. So those aren't answers; those are questions.
No, that's great. Do you think that there's anything to the WWE maybe coming to, like, a Turner network?
No, anything can happen in the World Wrestling Federation, but I doubt it. I think I know that the FX story is out there through Andrew Marchand and New York Post. I'm real curious about, like, Nick Khan's relationship with sports media has been an important issue for this company, and it's had a lot of effects in little ways, like, his interaction with media and probably his ability to get stories out there like that one, which maybe Andrew just found, independent of WWE. I don't know, but it's curious. And so I don't know. I think NBCU is likeliest to keep Raw. That would be the biggest shock of the things that could happen here if USA did not keep Raw. SmackDown continues to be the question, but who's going to buy SmackDown? Is Amazon going to really heavily bid for SmackDown? I don't know, because I do think there is a distribution problem in going on to Prime Video. There has to be something to offset that, because I don't think if you're WWE, I don't think you want SmackDown 52 weeks a year to be exclusively on Amazon Prime in 2024. Maybe further down the line, but not that soon. So what's the original question?
With WWE coming to, like, a Turner network.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. That NBCU, Fox, Amazon, maybe Disney via FX, not Apple, not WBD. I don't think it's happening. And I think WBD owns a piece of AEW anyway. And what are they going to do? They're going to have to pay a lot of money to get WWE. I mean, I guess it could play into getting fewer NBA games or something like that, but I just don't see that happening with AEW there. And I don't see AEW going anywhere else.
Sorry, Brandon. You dropped something in there. I just want to make sure I understood it correctly. You believe WBD has a piece of AEW?
I think so, yeah. That would be my speculation.
Okay. I was just doing a Bix there at a press conference. I just wanted to make sure so now the moment our hardcores have been waiting for, ratings talk. So again, from what we know from you and your sources, people about 60 years of age have been watching WoW in syndication in growing numbers. What does this mean in their place world of wrestling?
It's a good question because it's a show that just defies any other perception. Like if we didn't know these numbers, what would you guess that they were? You know, you'd probably guess a lower number than this. And they're on Vice. Did you know they're on Vice at midnight on Tuesdays? Now you do. Yeah, I think you
From
guys.
you.
Yes. And that's doing, what, tens of thousands more viewers. I've never heard anybody talk about this show online. I did watch like 2 episodes of it several months ago. Lavi did tell me where I can watch it on my local affiliates. I have not tuned in yet, I have to admit. But it is increasing in viewership. They just did their highest viewership ever, which is over 400,000 viewers. And it's hard to say, like, are there lead-ins that might be helping them at times? I don't know. It's on syndication in all different channels with probably all different lead-ins. Maybe sometimes there were maybe there's like a football game or something like that, because it's kind of it's listed in Nielsen anyway as a 4 p.m. Saturday or Sunday slot. So I don't know. It's it did. I think we finally did get that moment, the lobby that you were waiting for, where in the same week, or at least on an adjacent week, WoW in total viewership, is that right, did better than a Rampage.
Crazy.
Yes, exactly. I was waiting for that chart. We've been talking about it. I'm waiting for that chart to hit it. Now, do you know what this ratings that you're getting from what somebody who used to work for Sinclair, had contacts there, he had told me that a combination of multiple WLNY 55. So one important thing that I'd like to note is, like, it's over the air, but it's like maybe between the 8th and 11th or 12th most watched over the air station, even though it's owned by CBS. It airs on Saturday night at 11 p.m. and Sunday night at 11 p.m. Do you think that that's a combination, or it's like the first time that they air it in a market?
Sorry, do I think what is a combination?
Oh, like when you get a rating of like 3.7, does that combine like Sunday night at 11 p.m. in New York and Saturday night at 11 p.m.? Or do you think it's just the first time it airs in a market?
I believe we're looking at the average of the first run. I'm not 100% sure, but I think in all cases, that's what we're looking at. We're not including any reruns for the market, but all the first runs in the market for any given.
So it might even be viewed. It might even be viewed a little bit more.
Possibly. Yeah, I think for any given TV show in its ratings, that's what we're looking at. Like in the case of, I believe, Impact and New Japan are also replayed, but I've never gotten any of that data. MLW was replayed, right? Because some of these channels have a West Coast feed as well, right? So none of that is being factored in.
Okay. I didn't know if in syndication there's like some play with that. Because like when I mentioned from ROH, from what I understood, it was like, I mean, they were the ones reporting it, so they could.
I should correct myself before I mislead people. If a network has a West Coast feed, yes, that first run for the West Coast feed is counted. But if you're like Reels, which I don't believe has a West Coast feed, and you're re-airing, if you're airing something at 10 and then you're re-airing it 3 hours later, that doesn't get added together because it's all on the same channel.
So one more WoW related topic. So, okay, so they got a season 2 renewal. What do you think the market looks at pro wrestling now? Do you think like it would be a station by station? I know like in Houston, or at least for a time, Booker T's Reality of Wrestling would be bookended with it. So do you think it's an opportunity just for like other indies to contact like their local station, be like, hey, can we air with WoW? Or do you think there's like a greater potential impact, maybe like an Impact pitching a syndication company and saying, we could air something, look how WoW is doing? Like, how does a successful renewal in syndication maybe like create a better market for everyone?
I guess like if is what are the economics involved with getting on syndication? Who's paying who? I don't know the answer to that question.
From what I understand with the lower level programming, that it is like what you would imagine like pro wrestling to be, that it's like
Paid
you make
program.
money on the back end. You're like the syndicator isn't really taking a risk, and you're splitting advertising to whatever rate. And I have no idea if this is the case with WoW at all, but I actually saw some articles where it was like higher profile syndication at the same level of who's syndicating them. There wasn't really a risk being taken. Whereas, of course, at the top of that, like Wheel of Fortune or whatever it may be, then there's a significant rights fee.
Yeah, I'm just given that there's only one program that's really doing this, at least on a nationwide basis. I have to think that there's not a great economic incentive to do it. So I think the benefit is maybe in getting an audience and then being able to sell them some other product, whether that's pay-per-view or a ticket. WoW's not even doing that, or at least they're not trying to. So I just don't know what the business model is here.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Let me turn it over to John.
So I was watching Forbes Sports Money. Michael Ozana was interviewing Tony Khan. It was actually a really good interview. Did you happen to catch that on the Yes Network?
No.
Oh, it was actually pretty good. Had him on for a while. So I tweeted out I meant $100 million in revenue, not profit. I mean, I don't know if they're profitable, but they were talking about in 2023 he's made $100 million in revenue, and that they're coming up on, I guess this would be technically the fifth year. They're trying to be profitable. Are they anywhere closer, as far as you know, to the green, as far as then to the red? Like, where are they in the black?
I highly doubt they're profitable, and that I doubt that they've ever had a profitable year. I bet they came close in the pandemic year in 2020 because they didn't have to tour and load in and load out a lot, and they did a lot of shows at Daly's place. But I think it costs. I don't know. I'd have to think about it and do the math. I mean, especially what they're going to do now is they're going to do two shows a week, and that alone. So let's just say forget Collision. If they're just doing one taping per week, and let's say that costs $500,000, that's like $26 million right there. And I do believe that he made $100 million. I did an estimate and got about 100 million, I think, before he'd ever said that for 2022. Does it cost less than $100 million to operate AEW in 2022? I would guess so. Calculating expenses is harder for me to do than revenue, because revenue, we see the results of a lot more in public. But considering they've hired a lot of talent and they've ran a lot of shows and they're going to run more shows, I think it's a company that has not been profitable yet. But it's a business model that makes sense if you get a great TV deal and renewal here. If you get your TV rights doubled or tripled, and you go from making $44 million a year to making $100 million a year, yeah, you can be profitable then. And I think that that's the whole bet.
That was a pretty good interview. I'm always watching the Yes Network because of the Yankees, and I saw Forbes Sports Money that popped on. So he's talking about all the other deals that they've made in all the other countries.
When was this?
This was it was last week or a week and a half ago or so.
Okay.
They probably have repeats of it. I think it's online, actually. If you go to Forbes.com, I think they have Sports Money. I think they have their own page. But it was pretty good. He was going over all the different places, and they mentioned Japan, and for some reason it said that New Japan was like their number one source of revenue in Japan. So how deep does that deal go? I mean, are they really looking to like partner, or what's going on with New Japan?
It said what? It said New Japan is
like his it's his partners in Japan, and it said New Japan Pro Wrestling. So I don't know if that means financially or if that just means like gimmick.
It probably means you can watch AEW on New Japan World if you're in Japan.
Oh, okay.
And there's probably some sort of agreement there. I don't know if money is changing hands, but talent is changing hands, right?
Yep.
I think that's what it is, and I don't think the W doesn't have TV other than maybe some stuff on Samurai TV in Japan.
Just interesting because Tony was saying, not in that interview, other interviews, that he wants to have more of a relationship with New Japan. do you think that's good for AEW, bad for AEW? Like, is that really better for his business to be so, so in deep with New Japan Pro Wrestling, or does that not hurt at all?
Well, it depends on what it means to have more of a relationship.
Like, it almost seems like he's like, well, if WWE and UFC are merging, it almost seems like he's teasing that he may
No, I don't
merge.
buy this.
You know,
I think no. This was an AP article that I was interviewed for, and the whole premise was that we're gonna, in light of the UFC and WWE merger, now these
right,
two have to team up. It's just very publishable symmetry that works great for a mainstream article, and is probably great for talking with the guy from Forbes. But it's a talent exchange, and
right,
they're partnering in other ways, like New Japan World, but like they're not about to merge like UFC and WWE are. But you can't help but publish it if you're a mainstream outlet, I guess.
right. Sounds good. Yeah, I think the only thing UFC and WWE might do is like production people. I don't think there's going to be any sort of team up or
There's going
anything.
to be a lot of layoffs, and there's going to be a lot
Yeah,
of leaning down their employees, and they may partner in doing live events. I think they'll partner in doing sponsorships. Sponsors will be able to buy space with WWE and UFC together. Endeavor, I assume they're going to be using a lot of Endeavor services as part of this, and that according to them, they're going to be able to make better international media deals too.
it's just interesting with New Japan because to me, I don't know, I was more interested when they brought in Okada. And obviously, Tanahashi's a little bit past his prime, but I mean, I was still interested in him when they bring in Will Ospreay. I love when AEW brings in those guys. So I'm more interested. Obviously, the fans, there's 15,000 people in Toronto. So I would just be more interested in them working more together rather than going to like a New Japan Strong show or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, New Japan was, I mean, a lot of the energy and the brand interest that AEW sort of co-opted was off of New Japan and others in late 2018. Yeah.
For sure. So what's next for WrestleNomics as we wind it down?
I don't know. I got the rating for Dynamite will be out tomorrow. I don't know when people will listen to this, but sorry. I'm reporting the ratings. We're doing our first show that is behind the paywall, WrestleNomics Radio, this Sunday. I think people will probably listen to this after it's already happened, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But it will be behind the paywall the week after that and the week after that. It will still be free once a month at the beginning of the month, so people can still sample it. Yeah. Well, I'll continue to report stuff occasionally, like the McDivitt story that happened yesterday, and the lawsuits and things of that nature. We're doing monthly reports. I'm doing monthly reports for things. I have to do a Google Trends report again. So it just occurred to me. I have to
You're slacking.
pick up on that, but it's fairly easy to throw together. So I don't know, things like that. I've got a window on my computer open for a news update that I'll be doing later this week too.
And the last time you were on, I don't know if you probably won't remember, but I actually was Roman Reigns' a star. Man, a good thing they didn't make the draw. I'm sorry, is it a draw? Yes, is he a draw? Is he a star? Duh, yeah. Is he a draw? It seems like all the quarter hour ratings when you put it out, it's like, holy crap, 3 million? Like, whoa, nobody touches that. Not even, and they're pumping up how Cena got a big rating, or big quarter hour. Reigns, man, this bloodline stuff is heating up.
They've been peaking the end of SmackDown when he's been on it, and
Yep.
we've seen a double digit increase in that quarter for a lot of these, and that crosses my mathematical threshold into saying, okay, what does this quarter usually do from quarter to quarter?
Right.
Does it overperform it by 5 points? It sure does. On those occasions. So the Bloodline story is really continuing to help SmackDown and to help it do pretty good ratings. Yeah.
Feel like, right? They have never been up in the last 20 years, right? WWE, as far as any sort of ratings over it, wasn't it downward spiral until the last couple of years with Roman on top?
Probably. I mean, SmackDown is complicated because SmackDown has moved into better networks and better time slot. So there are years where SmackDown is up, but Raw, the increase in Raw ratings, which don't have Roman Reigns on them, is somewhat unprecedented in this era where entertainment options are fragmenting and cable households are declining. If I look at, I've got the spreadsheet open here, and if I look,
and Cody's quarter hours, I was looking, his quarter hours are pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. If I look at, going back to at least 2015, and it's down every year until 2022, where it's flat, and year to date, Raw is up 4%, which I
Wow.
could go back further here, but I'll save you some time. So
Wow.
it's pretty unprecedented, at least in this era where you're up against the headwind of TV not being what it once was.
Pretty impressive. WWE is kind of doing very well for sure. So where can we find WrestleNomics? Everybody, the Patreon, the Twitter, everything.
Patreon is patreon.com/WrestleNomics. You can also go to WrestleNomics.com/subscribe, and that'll also get you to the Patreon. The Twitter is twitter.com/WrestleNomics, and I'm also at Brandon Thurston on Twitter. This will probably sound like a time capsule, I'm afraid, in like a month or two, but I do have I have reserved the WrestleNomics handle on Threads. I don't know if that's ever going to become worth using, but there it is. And WrestleNomics.com is a website where you can get access to free stuff as well.
Also, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Check the website, tmptempire.com. Lavi, where can everybody find you? If Lavi's still here.
Check out my long form article, especially on WoW, on LionCubJobSearch.com. Follow me on Twitter at LavieMarg, LavieMarg, and check out our LinkedIn group, The Business of the Business, Pro Wrestling Industry on LinkedIn. Brandon, no pressure, but you're invited to join us there.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Nice. Thank you to Brandon. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. See you right back here next week for a little Business of the Business. We'll see you next week, folks.